Okay, for this step, there's a few tools that I've laid out, and what we're going to need for it is your worm drive saw. You're going to still need your screw gun, your adjustable square, tape measure, of course your safety equipment, and a clamp. And then this nice little special piece that I built previously is a jig for using your worm drive. I'm going to explain quickly how to manufacture one of these, and I assure you, you're going to want to do it. So we've gone and flipped the base over. So now you're looking at the side of the flag project that we're actually going to glue and screw the actual flag to. So what I want to talk about now briefly is we've built this to what we called originally the rough dimension. And now I want to take approximately 1/2 inch off of every single side. Now the reason I want to do this is because there's always some anomalies to the wood. Okay, you remember some of it kind of bows or crowns or doesn't quite fit evenly. And so what we want to do is cut an edge back here that is strictly perpendicular, and that when we put our frame onto it, it'll be a really nice edge and it'll fit really nice. And I assure you, when you're doing your corners, you're going to want to do this step first. So let's go ahead and get started on this. All right, I talked previously in these episodes of this tutorial about how to make a jig. So as you can just see, you can make it really any way you want, but I want to give you the kind of the concept. Here's what I've done is I've built essentially a fence. Now what's really key is that this fence, this edge right here is ripped on a table saw, so you get a super accurate and true edge, because that's going to be the fence or the guide that your saw follows. So take a piece of OSB, and you can actually run it long, believe it or not. Glue this piece onto it, and I screwed and glued it on. And then what I did is my first pass on this, I actually ripped this piece of OSB with the saw blade itself, and then it made my jig for me. And I knew that this edge was true then to this edge, which was essentially measured off the width of the blade. So why is this important? Well, this is going to give us a real clean, flat edge. So now, when you set this up, let's say I want to come in 1/2 inch, all I got to remember to do is hold it off 1/16 of an inch, so it'd be 1/2 inch plus that 1/16 of an inch, because I've got to account for the width of the blade. And then this is where I would actually screw this down and clamp it on the other end. And then as I run my saw, I'm going to get a really super clean edge. Now be sure to cut the full length of the 4x8 sheet first. And you will use that line to go into this cap that we basically built, because those could be uneven or unsure a little bit. So we'll use this line and continue on through the piece up here. We've got this piece glued and screwed down. When you cut into this OSB, again, that'll be the first pass. That will account for the thickness of your blade. So when you go to measure, just always remember that you've got to account for that 1/16 of an inch from this point. Okay, so we're going to set the jig up so that we cut this nice flat edge here. And remember, to account for the thickness of the blade, I want to take 1/2 inch off here, which means I have to add 1/16 of an inch. So I'm just going to take my adjustable square and I'm going to put it at 9/16, and then I'm just going to scoot this jig in until it touches it. Okay? And then go ahead and clamp that off. Now this end is set. All right, and we're good to go. Let's go ahead and measure the other end. All right, same procedure on this end. And because we can't clamp to this thing and cut at the same time, I've just put a screw in here that I'm going to recess. Again, we take our adjustable square and we make sure that this thing is 9/16 from this first 4x8 sheet. Don't worry about this, we'll cut it later. So as you guys can see, there may be a little bit of a not so flat edge here. But now with this jig secured in place, screwed on your end, clamped on this end, we're going to take the skill saw and we're going to run it down this jig, and we're going to make a real true flat edge. And that's that edge that we're going to put our frame to. Let's go ahead and do that now. When adjusting the depth of the actual blade, make sure that as you're laying on here, you get enough depth to go through, and also make sure your sawhorses are held off enough. Of course, it goes without saying, don't get your hands anywhere near the bottom of that saw. Let's go ahead and cut. So as you can see, we need to readjust our jig so that we can take the rest of this cap off. Now, using this as my guide, I want to take my jig and make sure that it fits perfectly to that. Yeah. So now I'm going to screw in this end because I can't clamp it, obviously. And it's flush with my regular cut. Nice. Let's go ahead and clamp the other edge. Using this again as my edge, I'm just going to make sure that that's nice and flush, and then I'll clamp this off again. Okay, put your saw back in here and finish your cut from here on out. It should be square. All right, we've cut the long aspect, if you will, of the bottom of the edge of the flag. Now we're going to measure up 5 foot and 1/8 inch. We're going to mark it, and then we're going to go to the other end of the flag. We're going to measure it the same, mark it, and then we're going to put our jig on this side, and then we're going to cut again. You'll do just the exact same cut that you did on the top of the flag as you'll now do on the bottom of the flag. Okay, we've already cut the top of the flag and the bottom of the flag, and they're square to each other, and they're 5 foot and 1/8 inch. That's how wide this flag is. So let's go ahead now and cut the one end, and then we'll cut the opposite end, and we'll be down to our dimensional flag. Again, I'm going to come back about 9/16 till I get a touch, and then I'm going to clamp. And now the same thing on the other side. Measure 9/16, looks good, go ahead and clamp. So let's go ahead and cut this end. And now the same thing that we did with the top and the bottom of the flag, we're going to do to both ends. We've cut the one end, now we're going to measure out 9 foot 3/4 inches, tick mark both ends, and cut it just like you did. Then we should be square on both top, bottom, and both sides. So let's put a frame around this. What you can see is I've taken, again, per the materials list, I've used some nice hardwood red oak. This is 3/4 inch by 3.5 inch. Now what I suggest you do every single time is clamp it to the surface that you're going to do, and I prefer to do the one end piece first. Clamp it dry. Make sure that you've got your 45 down here and that it's measured. It's not just measured, but this piece is really exacting, okay? As tight as you can get that juncture right there, make sure it's accurate. Okay, and then you're just going to clamp it. Now you remember the pine that we glued and screwed to the back side? That's what you're going to clamp this to. You're going to put clamps on here and hold it to that nice edge that you cut. And that's why we cut those 4 edges, is to give you a nice perpendicular edge to glue and screw to. Well, we won't be screwing this. So let's go move around to this side. Make sure that it's true and that it's straight and that there's no bows in this bottom. And once you're assured of that, this is where you'll mark it. And remember, when you're miter cutting these are going to be at 45-degree angles, okay? So when you lay it down on your saw, make sure that you remember which way this frame goes so you don't waste any lumber. So after you have the end piece on and it's dry, do one of the full lengths. Once that one is cut, glued on and clamped and it's dried, then I want you to pay special attention to making sure that these corners come in really tight, okay? And that can be a little bit of a challenge. So if you can't get this super tight, I don't want you to freak out about it, because at the end of the day, you're going to sand this down. I usually put wood putty in here, and then when you see how I treat these end corners, you'll see that I really doll them up. So sometimes this seam is not as significant as you may want to be worried about. So I do the end piece, then I do a side piece, Then I do the opposite side piece, and then at the very end, I do the final end piece. Then you should have 4 pieces of hardwood or red oak trim all around this piece. After you've glued on all 4 pieces of your trim or your frame, we'll move on to the next aspect of the tutorial.